The ballroom was bathed in soft golden light that shimmered against the crystal chandeliers, but for me, it felt like standing under a spotlight no one was looking at. Everyone around me moved with purpose, laughter echoing, heels clicking, champagne glasses clinking in celebration, yet I might as well have been invisible. It was my cousin Clara's wedding, an event my family had spent months planning, yet somehow I wasn't part of any of it. My mother fluttered between tables, ensuring the guests were comfortable. My father was deep in conversation with uncles I barely knew. My sister, radiant and confident as always, was surrounded by bridesmaids, her laughter loud enough to make the whole hall turn. I stood at the edge of the room, my reflection trembling in the glass of champagne I held, realizing that no one had even noticed my arrival. I had bought a new dress for this wedding. Soft lilac, modest but elegant, thinking maybe, just maybe, this time they would see me. But as I walked past familiar faces, no one stopped to compliment or greet me. Not even a polite smile. I felt a sharp pang in my chest as I passed a group of cousins taking selfies, one of them holding my phone because I had lent it earlier. They didn't even call me to join. I smiled faintly, pretending I didn't care, though my throat tightened with every passing second. I found a quiet spot near the back, beside a large floral arrangement that smelled faintly of lilies. Ironic, considering that was my name. I watched as Clara glided down the aisle, a picture of perfection, with everyone rising to their feet, applauding and teary-eyed. My mother clutched my father's arm, whispering something that made him chuckle, and I stood there, a silent shadow. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the room erupted in cheers. I clapped too, forcing myself to blend in. But deep down, I felt like a background extra in someone else's story. When the reception began, I went to look for my name on the seating chart. It was a huge golden board covered in elegant cursive names, arranged in perfect rows. My eyes darted across the list once, twice, 3 times. Clara and David's wedding guests. My sister's name was there, seated near the family table. My parents were together naturally. My cousins were spread around the center tables. But me? My name wasn't there. My hands trembled as I brushed down the list again, certain I'd just missed it. "Excuse me," I murmured to the wedding planner nearby, trying to sound calm. "I think there's been a mistake. I can't find my name." The woman, still typing something into her tablet, glanced up briefly. What's your name?" "Lily," she scrolled down her digital list, humming softly. "Oh, right. You're at the overflow table, near the back." Overflow. The word stung more than I expected. I forced a polite smile and nodded. "Thank you." I followed her gesture toward the corner of the hall, where a small table sat near the exit doors, away from the laughter, away from the family. Only 2 seats. One was already occupied. A man sat there, looking at his phone, his tie loosened, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd grown tired of perfection. He glanced up when he noticed me approach, and a faint smile curved his lips. "I guess we're the outcasts tonight," he said lightly, his tone half amused. Half kind, a laugh escaped me. Small, awkward, but real. "Seems like it." He stood slightly, extending a hand. "Ethan." "Lily," I said, shaking it. His handshake was firm yet gentle, grounding. "Nice to meet you, Lily the overflow guest," he teased softly. I smiled despite myself. "Likewise, Ethan the outcast." For the first time that evening, I sat down without feeling like I had to shrink. We chatted between the courses, small talk at first, how we knew the couple, where we lived, what we did for work. He was a friend of the groom, apparently invited out of politeness, and ended up at the table because every other seat was full. There was something comforting about his honesty, the way he didn't try too hard to impress. He listened, truly listened, when I spoke. When I mentioned I was an illustrator trying to make a living off commissions, his eyes lit with curiosity, not judgment. "That's actually amazing," he said. "I can't even draw a stick figure straight." I laughed, feeling warmth spread through me, not from the wine, but from being seen. Around us, the music began to swell as the first dance started. I turned slightly, Watching Clara and David glide across the floor, everyone's eyes fixed on them. They looked beautiful, radiant, everything I wasn't. I felt that familiar ache again, the reminder that I would never be the shining one in the room. "Do you dance?" Ethan asked suddenly. I blinked. "Only when no one's watching," he smiled. "Perfect. No one's watching us anyway." He stood and offered his hand. For a moment I hesitated. My heart pounded as I looked around, but he was right. No one cared what I was doing. I took his hand. We moved slowly to the rhythm of the music, tucked away in our corner. His steps were unhurried, his grip gentle but sure. I hadn't danced like that in years, not since I was a teenager spinning alone in my room. I looked up at him once, and he smiled that kind, patient smile again. For the first time that night, I felt light, free. The sting of being forgotten blurred into something softer. As the night deepened, the crowd grew louder. Laughter, clinking glasses, the photographers' flash illuminating faces that weren't mine. Yet there I was, in the shadows, laughing quietly with a stranger who made me feel visible. Every word he said seemed to peel away another layer of loneliness I had carried for too long. He asked about my family, and I told him vaguely that we weren't very close. He didn't press. He just nodded, as if he understood more than I said. When dinner ended and speeches began, I noticed my parents glance toward me for the first time that night. My mother's eyes widened slightly when she saw me laughing, genuinely laughing. My father's brow furrowed as if confused. I almost wanted to wave at them, to shout, "See? I'm here, I exist." But instead, I stayed quiet, letting the moment be mine alone. The best man's toast echoed through the hall. To love, family, and the joy of togetherness. I clinked glasses with Ethan. To survive, I whispered under my breath. He chuckled. To be noticed, even if just by one person. We smiled at each other. Later, as guests began to leave, I thanked him for his company. He smiled warmly. "Anytime, Lily. You made a long, awkward wedding, actually. Bearable." "Same to you," I said softly. He walked me to the parking lot, the night air cool against my skin. The music from the hall echoed faintly behind us. "I'm glad I sat at that table," he said, his voice gentle. "So am I whispered. When I reached my car, he hesitated before speaking again. "Maybe we'll meet at another overflow table someday." I smiled, not realizing how much I wanted that to be true. Or maybe a better one. He grinned, his eyes kind. "Deal." I watched him walk away before sitting inside my car, my heart still warm. I looked at myself in the mirror. The same face, same lilac dress, same tired eyes. But tonight, something was different. For the first time in years, I didn't look like the invisible one. Driving home through the quiet streets, I replayed the night in my mind. The laughter, the small talk, the dance in the corner. It wasn't about the family who ignored me, or the cousins who pretended I wasn't there. It was about that one moment when someone looked past the noise and saw me. Truly saw me. And maybe that was all I needed to remember, that I existed. Not for their attention, but for my own worth. As the lights of the city flickered outside my window, I whispered to myself, maybe being invisible isn't always a curse. Sometimes it's where the right people finally find you. That night, I slept with a soft smile, unaware that a stranger's kind glance at a forgotten table would soon change everything about how I saw myself, and how the world saw me. The next morning, I woke to the faint vibration of my phone on the nightstand. Sunlight leaked through the curtains, slicing my room into strips of gold and gray. I groaned, blinking away sleep, and reached for the phone, expecting silence. But instead, I was greeted by a stream of messages in the family group chat. Pictures from the wedding flooded the screen, smiling faces, champagne flutes raised high, dancing, laughter, perfect moments carefully captured and curated. I scrolled slowly, scanning each image, hoping, no, begging, to find myself in even one of them. I wasn't there. Not in the group photo, not in the dance floor shots, not even in the blurry background of a single video. It was as though I had never been to the wedding at all. Had the best night ever. Clara's message gleamed at the top of the chat. My mother had replied with a string of heart emojis and, "So proud of you both." My sister added, "Everything was perfect. Couldn't have been more magical." I read those words over and over until my chest began to ache. Perfect. Everything had been perfect. Of course it had, because perfection didn't include me. My stomach twisted as I set the phone down. I thought I'd grown used to the way my family sidelined me, the way I hovered at the edges of their world, tolerated but not loved, seen but not acknowledged. But seeing my absence so neatly documented in those photos hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure. The phone buzzed again. A new message popped up, but not from my family. It was Ethan mourning invisible girl. I stared at the words, half a smile tugging at my lips despite everything. "Guess I lived up to the name," I replied. A few seconds later, "Coffee? You deserve better company than yesterday's ghosts." I hesitated for a moment, then typed back, "There's a cafe near the venue." "Meet me there?" His reply came instantly. "On my way." By the time I arrived, the cafe was quiet. Soft music playing, the scent of roasted coffee beans thick in the air. Ethan was already there, sitting by the window, his jacket draped over the chair beside him. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way that felt genuine, unforced. It was strange being greeted like I mattered. "You look more awake than I expected," he said, grinning. "Fake it till you make it," I joked. Sliding into the seat across from him, he laughed softly, and for a moment, I forgot the hollow ache from earlier. We ordered coffee, and our conversation flowed easily, like we'd known each other longer than a single evening. I told him about the wedding, how I hadn't even been on the seating chart until someone mentioned the overflow table. He shook his head. "Sounds like they didn't deserve you there," he said. I let out a soft laugh. "I think they just forgot I existed." His expression turned serious. "No one forgets someone like you, Lily. They just choose to ignore what makes them uncomfortable." I looked at him, puzzled. "What's that supposed to mean?" He took a sip of his coffee before answering. "You're the kind of person that reminds people of what they lack. Quiet strength, real heart. It's easier for them to pretend you're not there." The sincerity in his tone caught me off guard. I dropped my gaze, feeling a lump form in my throat. No one had ever said something like that to me before. When I asked about him, he leaned back, fingers wrapped around his cup. "My father owns a construction company," he said. I was supposed to take over, but I didn't want to. I studied literature instead. You'd think I'd murdered someone from the way he reacted. He laughed, but there was pain beneath it. "We haven't spoken in over a year." I nodded slowly. "So you know what it's like?" Being the disappointment. He met my eyes. The unwanted one. That single line cut through the noise of the cafe. In that shared silence, I felt seen, like someone had finally put into words what I'd been too afraid to say my whole life. We stayed there for hours, talking about everything and nothing, art, books, family, loneliness, and the strange freedom that comes from being underestimated. Every story he told carried a mix of humor and hurt, like he was peeling away layers of himself just enough for me to see the truth underneath. When I told him I loved sketching quiet moments, empty benches, reflections in puddles, hands reaching for coffee cups, he smiled. "You find beauty in the unnoticed," he said. "That's rare." When the afternoon sun shifted, painting the room in soft amber, I realized how long we'd been there. Time had slipped past unnoticed, and for once, I didn't feel invisible. We walked outside together, the wind brushing against us. "So," Ethan said, stuffing his hands into his pockets, "how does it feel to finally be noticed?" I laughed. "Strange, but nice. Good," he said, smiling. "You deserve it." As we parted ways, he added, "This isn't goodbye, Lily. I'll text you." And he did. That night, as I sat by the window in my small apartment, the city lights glowing beyond the glass, my phone buzzed again. Next time, we won't sit in the corner. Promise. I smiled, typing back, I'll hold you to that. But even as I sent the message, I couldn't shake the unease creeping at the edges of my happiness. Because deep down, I knew my family, and I knew how they reacted when I stepped outside the lines they drew for me. 2 days later, my mother called unexpectedly. "Lily, I saw you having coffee with someone," she began, her voice laced with that familiar sharpness. "Who was he?" "Just a friend," I said carefully. "Just a friend," she repeated, unimpressed. "You should be careful, Lily. People notice things. You don't want to give them the wrong impression." "The wrong impression?" I asked, feeling irritation rise. "You know how people talk," she said quickly. "I'm only thinking of your reputation, and the family's. Don't embarrass us." Her words hit like a slap. Don't embarrass us. As if I'd been an embarrassment my whole life, just waiting for another excuse. "You didn't seem worried about that when you forgot to seat me at the wedding," I muttered before hanging up. The silence afterward was heavy. My hands shook. I hated how easily they still had the power to make me feel small. Later that night, Ethan called. "Rough day?" "You could say that," I sighed. "My mom thinks I'm embarrassing." "Then you're doing something right," he said. I laughed softly, and for a moment the tension eased. He had a way of turning the pain into something bearable. Over the next few weeks, we met often: coffee shops, bookstores, walks by the river. Every time it felt like the world grew a little bigger, a little brighter. He told me about his favorite authors. I showed him sketches I'd never shared with anyone. He started calling me Lily the Unseen Artist. I teased him about his dramatic flair, and he'd laugh, saying, "You inspire it." But as our connection deepened, my family's disapproval grew. My sister saw us together once and smirked. "You dating someone like him? That's surprising." "We're not dating," I said defensively. She laughed. "Good, because he's way out of your league." The words sank like stones in my chest. Later that evening, I told Ethan about it, trying to make light of it. He frowned. "They really don't see you, do they?" "No," I said softly. "But you do." "I always will," he said. Those 4 words stayed with me long after he dropped me off. For the first time in years, I started believing I could be someone other than the family's afterthought. Someone worth noticing, worth loving. But even as hope bloomed, a part of me feared it, because I knew what my family did to things they couldn't control. I knew how they twisted affection into obligation and love into silence. That night, as I sat sketching by the window, I thought of Ethan's promise. "Next time we won't sit in the corner." It echoed in my mind like a quiet vow, one that I didn't realize would soon force both of us to face the very people who had spent years pretending I wasn't there. For now, though, I let myself feel the warmth of something new. Friendship, connection, maybe even the fragile beginning of love, unaware that it was only the calm before the storm. A month later, Clara decided to host another dinner, an elegant family appreciation night, as she called it, to thank everyone who helped with her wedding. When the invitation came through our family group chat, I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether to go. My name was on the list this time, though I knew it was probably out of courtesy, not care. Part of me wanted to decline, to spare myself the awkward glances and shallow conversations. But when Ethan heard about it, he simply said, "Let's go. Let's show them the corner table doesn't define you." His voice carried such quiet confidence that it gave me courage I didn't know I had. For once, I wanted to walk into that room not as the forgotten guest, but as someone who belonged, if not to them, then at least to myself. That evening, I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing out the folds of a deep emerald dress I'd bought a few days earlier. It wasn't loud or showy, but it made me feel powerful. Ethan arrived right on time, dressed in a tailored black suit that made him look effortlessly composed. When he saw me, his eyes softened. "You look radiant," he said quietly, almost reverently. I blushed, murmuring a small thank you before we left together. The drive was peaceful. He hummed softly to a song playing on the radio while I watched the city lights blur through the window, my stomach tightening with both dread and anticipation. The restaurant was already buzzing with laughter and music when we arrived. As soon as we stepped in, I felt the familiar wave of eyes turning toward us. Curiosity, surprise, even discomfort. My mother blinked twice as if she wasn't sure what she was seeing. My father's polite smile faltered for half a second before he recovered. My sister, sitting with Clara near the head of the table, raised an eyebrow, her smirk half hidden behind her wine glass. I could almost hear the unspoken questions floating in the air. Who is he? Why is she here with him? Ethan sensed my hesitation and gently squeezed my hand. Breathe, he whispered. You're allowed to take up space. I smiled faintly and followed his lead as he guided me to our seats. We were placed at the far end of the long table. Not quite the corner, but close enough to remind me of where I once sat. Only this time I wasn't alone. Ethan's presence beside me was grounding, his hand occasionally brushing mine under the table, a small reminder that I wasn't invisible anymore. Dinner began with the usual pleasantries. Clara was glowing, recounting her honeymoon in Greece, and my family listened with practiced adoration. I sat quietly, occasionally answering questions directed my way, though they were few and perfunctory. My mother complimented my dress once, her tone polite but distant. My sister leaned over to Clara and whispered something that made them both laugh softly. Ethan noticed, his jaw tightening, but I shook my head gently. It's fine, I whispered. I'm used to it. He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, You shouldn't have to be. His words sank deep, stirring something inside me, a quiet defiance that had long been buried beneath years of trying to be agreeable, invisible, acceptable. I lifted my head and began to engage, asking Clara about her travels, complimenting her on the decor, smiling when others spoke. Slowly, my voice joined the current of conversation. And though a few still looked surprised to hear it, I refused to shrink this time. When the plates were cleared and the laughter grew louder, the best man, David's brother, stood to make a toast. His voice boomed with good humor as he thanked everyone for their support. Glasses clinked and people cheered. I smiled, relieved that the night was nearly over. But then, as he sat down, Ethan stood up. At first I thought he was getting more wine, but when he raised his glass and cleared his throat, the room quieted. Every head turned toward him. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I'd like to make one more toast, he said, his tone calm but commanding enough to capture everyone's attention. He glanced at me briefly, his eyes warm, before turning to the table. To Lily! The name hung in the air like a spark. Conversations died instantly. I felt the weight of every gaze turned to me, confused, curious, startled. My pulse thundered in my ears. To the girl everyone overlooked, Ethan continued, his voice steady but rich with emotion. Who sat quietly while others took the spotlight, but never once lost her grace. You may not have been on the guest list that night, he said, pausing just long enough for the words to land. But you were the only person who made it worth attending. Gasps rippled through the table. My mother's hand froze midway to her glass. My sister's smirk vanished. Ethan raised his glass higher, his expression unwavering. So here's to Lily, and to everyone who's ever felt invisible, uninvited or unseen. May we never let anyone make us feel small again. For a heartbeat, the room was utterly silent. I couldn't breathe. My eyes blurred with tears, my throat thick with emotion I didn't have words for. Then, slowly, Clara began to clap. Hesitant at first, then firmer. One by one, others joined in. The best man, a few cousins, even my father after a long pause. My mother looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time in years. There was shock in her eyes, but also something softer, guilt perhaps, or recognition. I rose from my chair, trembling but smiling through the tears that threatened to spill. I lifted my own glass, my voice barely more than a whisper at first. To the stranger, I said, looking at Ethan, who made me feel seen. The applause swelled again, louder this time. Ethan smiled, his gaze never leaving mine. and when I sat down, he reached over and took my hand. The moment felt surreal, fragile, and infinite all at once. As the dinner resumed, the atmosphere shifted subtly. People began talking to me, really talking. Clara leaned across the table asking about my art, my work. Even my sister, her pride wounded, offered a stilted compliment about my unique perspective. My mother's words were measured, but her eyes carried something new, acknowledgement. I wasn't sure if forgiveness was there yet, or understanding, but at least the wall between us had cracked. Later that night, when the crowd began to thin, I stepped out onto the terrace to catch my breath. The city lights glittered below like tiny stars scattered across the ground. Ethan joined me, slipping his jacket over my shoulders without a word. For a while, we just stood there in silence, the cool breeze brushing against our faces. "You didn't have to do that," I said finally, turning to him. "You didn't have to stand up for me." He smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for you. I did it with you. You were already standing, you just didn't realize it yet." My chest tightened with emotion. "You're going to make me cry again." "Then I'll hand you the napkin this time," he teased softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. I laughed, a sound light and free. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole. Not because someone had rescued me, but because someone had reminded me that I never needed saving in the first place. As the evening drew to an end, my parents approached us at the door. My mother hesitated before speaking. "Lily," she began, her voice uncharacteristically gentle, "I didn't realize how much we've—" She stopped, searching for the right word. "Overlooked you." I didn't say anything, but I nodded. That was enough for now. When Ethan and I walked out into the night, he took my hand again, his fingers intertwining with mine. "You're not invisible anymore," he whispered, his tone firm but tender. I looked up at him, smiling through the quiet tears that spilled down my cheeks. "No," I said softly, "I don't think I ever was. I just needed someone to remind me to look up." As we walked away from the glowing restaurant, laughter fading behind us, I felt the weight of years lift off my shoulders. The night air was cool, but inside I was warm, anchored, alive, seen. And somewhere deep in my heart, I knew that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one where I no longer waited to be invited, because I had finally learned that I belonged wherever I chose to stand.